Achiampong. It is a tremendous pleasure to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of the exhibition.
No, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you to the whole team as well. It's been so exciting to be a part of this, and yeah, I only wish I could actually be out there physically to see the show. I've seen so many images and some responses on Instagram, and it's just great to be seeing how positively people are responding to the work.
Yes, no, it's we're tremendously pleased. So I'm really excited to talk to you more about your work specifically because you work in such a range of media, from video to performance, sculpture installation, the sound, and painting, of course.
Mm.
And you explore like a really rich, complex confluence of, like diasporic consciousness combined with this question of the post-digital identity, and then also intersections of pop culture and post-colonial critique. So I was wondering if you might talk about the early stirrings that occurred for you that led you to this path of making art and also to explore these areas of inquiry.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's quite it's a large one. I have to go back quite a bit time-wise and in order to unpack that really, because I think in terms of my approach as a practitioner, I'm really interested in so many of these mediums and more simply, especially because of the learning aspect to it. When I embark on a new project or a new set of ideas, there tends to be a period of research where I'm learning about whether it's new aspects of application to create something, whether that's a certain approach to sound or the use of a certain aspect of graphic imagery and so on. But I'd say as to what really kind of influenced or was perhaps like the genesis to how I built on all of these different strands, I think is really through my own personal upbringing. And I think I have to say to begin with that I come from lower working class backgrounds. We experienced poverty when I was a kid. I grew up in East London in a place called Bethnal Green, and so I never went to galleries or museums or things like that at all. That being said, I experienced art, just not art that is kind of spoken about in the kind of like in the so-called high category. Although for me, like I see things like music, for example, video games, DJing, all of these different processes as things that every much as important as perhaps like a painting, for example. So on the one hand, my parents would take me and my siblings to church as children every Sunday, where I would watch my mother sing within the church choirs, or my father would be playing in various like church bands. And I watched them in amazement. These two people whom, amongst other relatives, they worked crazy shifts doing like multiple jobs, and then they were able to kind of devote themselves to I guess the spirit, as it were, in this case, in the context of Christianity. So to see that kind of devotion, despite the difficulties and turmoil they had to deal with, was just it was nothing short of incredible in my eyes. And then I guess watching people like my uncle, whom he was like one of the first DJs to really kind of travel and do kind of like DJ sets with mixing high life with popular forms of like Western music, like hip hop or R&B and so on. And to see him also crafting mixtapes, actually, before I even knew about it as a thing within hip hop culture, was massive. Like, of course, like I didn't know the complete ins and outs as a child. I'd kind of I'd destroy some of his tapes sometimes and whatnot. But I was introduced to something, when I think about it, that I think a lot of people perhaps wouldn't have had that kind of experience or maybe even opportunity. you know, add to that growing up within a part of East London where, you know, the sounds of like garage or jungle or moving right through to the likes of grime, you know, within like the areas of like Roman Road, E3, sorry, like those who know will understand that. But growing up within that kind of area and being around people who would be either be emceeing or producing sounds, producing beats, going to what they would call the studio, which was really just their bedroom with, you know, a really kind of like cheap PC setup or so on. Again, these kinds of things really it inspired me, you know. My love of films as well, watching like movies on repeat, like, I don't know, Terminator 2 or Coming to America, like learning phrases, I don't know why, and listening to soundtracks again and again, all of these kinds of things, they wove their way into, I think, for me, a way of thinking that I opened up across my years of study, particularly at the Slade School of Fine Art between 2006 and 2008. But you know, a lot of these forms, like I would say I didn't kind of learn them in a, let's say, like a traditional kind of way, you know. So my approach to filmmaking, for example, I didn't go to filmmaking school. I mean, we only had one module in my BA, but I wouldn't say that that was enough to really give me an understanding of how to make a film. I learned how to make films actually by just watching them. And then, you know, when the internet was a thing to be able to use, by actually researching and doing more research and just trial and error and things like that. So, you know, my practice really, I think, is even at this point of trajectory, a lot of things are still trial and error for me, which for me is a very enjoyable way to create, because it means there's risk involved, but there's also a certain aspect of payoff in that I'm learning something new all the time. So I just can't stick with the one thing all the time. I think that's also part of my personality. I just get too bored doing a singular thing all the time, you know.
Well, I mean, you really get a sense of like the syncretism, but like I would say the interdisciplinarity of your work is well explained in this one phrase that I picked out of different bios and artist statements that I've read, where you describe yourself as crate digging, you know,
Yeah.
the vaults of history. So it's like, on the one hand, you know, you have that digger instinct,
Yeah.
you know, and then, you know, we have all of these, you know, the analogies, the ideas of, you know, really kind of combing through the archives of, you know, vinyl records and
Oh
what they
yeah.
have to tell us.
Yes.
And there's, you know, it's just endless, right? It's an
Yeah.
endless sea of incredible finds
Yeah.
that are out there. But then how you bring that into your understanding of the world and your own history, and narratives that are dominant and the ones that are suppressed. So, you know, there is that critique then that comes into contact with, you know, the research that you're doing and the many ways that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Super
Yeah,
nice. I love that.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, you know, again, to say, and I'm really glad that you picked up on that, Cheryl, that kind of crate digging aspect. You know, I would say, yeah, in a way, like if one were to come into my studio here right now, they would see, you know, an array or an archive of material, whether that's DVDs, video games, vinyls, some things that I've inherited from my parents, and then just an array of books, really, and periodicals and things. Like, I'm really interested in learning about things and relearning or going back to things that I thought I understood at one point in time, and then there's even more to perhaps even, you know, pick out, really. So it's this ongoing kind of fascination. I love just going through things like, you know, taking out a CD, for example, and listening to something that perhaps I didn't pick up on in terms of those frequencies, and then to, you know, pick back up again is very important to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we could pivot to the work in the exhibition, because it is a really excellent kind of example of how you bring all these different found images into play with sort of current discourses in art, but also critical discourses from a post-colonial perspective. So we're presenting Mighty Jesus, which is from the 2014 series of paintings called Holy Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to sort of like getting us into that work, I was wondering if we could discuss it in relation to your performance, which is called Cloud from 2013 or
Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
And then
indeed.
the video, there was this cloud.
Yes.
And then maybe we could talk about cloud
Yes.
as this device in your work, you know, as it's
Yeah,
got
yeah.
all these multiple associations now.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, yeah, perhaps maybe I'll unpack a little bit of the history of this cloud face motif, which you know is very, you know, prevalent and visual within the Mighty Jesus work. So that comes from, I guess, yeah, an aspect of personal experience connected to racism. Of course, across the planet, you know, that manifests itself in various ways, and amongst violence and other things. One of the ways that, you know, racism has kind of permeated, you know, I across the planet, arguably, I would say, is through products or advertising and things. In the UK, where I grew up, in like the early 80s, and then going into the early mid 80s, and then going into the 90s, there was a brand which is still about, but at the time they utilized a mascot to sell their marmalade. The name of the brand is Robertson's, and the name of the mascot was the Robertson's Golly, which you would find on like the sides of the jam jars. You know, you could collect these tokens, and from collecting these tokens, you could get dollies and children's books, all that kind of stuff. And I remember, you know, when my mum would sometimes prepare breakfast, or I'd be doing so, like, you know, I would just look at this jar, and I didn't understand what was being said. I did know personally, it just felt hurtful. You know, this kind of weird black face with red smiley lips and these big eyes, kind of like feeling very much like it was insulting towards myself as a black person. So the work in itself, it starts off with like a series that I created going back to, like, let's say, like 2007, 2008, called Let Me School You, where I began to scan in family photos from a range of photo albums that I own, and I covered all of the faces of us, all of the faces of my family, all of us. You know, we're all black, and so I thought about this, you know, this gollywog kind of character. Again, to add a bit more history to the character, or its inception, is the CEO of the brand, at a point in time around, I guess, like pre kind of World War I, they traveled to the United States, and they became very inspired by the American minstrel shows, of course, where, you know, white comedians and actors and actresses and so on are blackening up their faces and presenting derogatory stereotypes of black people. Upon returning to the UK, the director of the brand decided to create this mascot to essentially sell their product, to sell their jam and marmalade. So out of that, you know, like I said, you know, these illustrations, storybooks, and so on, nursery rhymes, etc., became very popular. This thing was a phenomenon in the UK, and you even had the likes of the BBC, the British, you know, Broadcasting Corporation, creating their own show called the Minstrel Show. So this was a very big thing. It's not something that I would say, you know, was small. It's part of the mainstream. It's part of popular culture. Of course, when we think about other places, like within, you know, Europe, you have I don't know, like the product Banania in France, or in Spain you have Los Conguitos, or, you know, you have Zwarte Piet in the Netherlands, or Black Pete, right? So this is quite a big so-called kind of phenomena really, which, myself, a kid of like the 80s and the 90s, my head is just, I'm confused. And of course, I'm sure many other people are as well. Like I didn't really understand. I didn't know how to kind of locate what that meant. But what I did know was when I was making these images that utilized, showed my family and so on, I wanted to think a lot about the gaze of whiteness and how it places blackness within an uncomfortable frame of representation. So I guess how that kind of makes its way to the Holy Cloud series, and especially Mighty Jesus, is these images, or should I say posters? Actually, they're originally from Ghana, and I remember coming across some of these posters as a kid upon some of my first journeys to Ghana, seeing these really strange. I'd say they're kind of like memes within memes, really. You've got this really odd kind of clip art of images that kind of speak to a kind of like maybe proto like Renaissance era moment of Christian iconography and so on, matched with like psalms or quotes from the Bible in really strange but very bold colors. And sometimes there are typos here and there. And I just always found them to be just strange things. In fact, I think as a kid, like I was quite scared of them. Like just looking at this really kind of pasty faced, like Jesus, like this person who's apparently supposed to save us, who looks to me like, I don't know, like some kind of villain out of a horror film. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, everywhere I move, like I see those eyes following me. I don't think this person's here to save me. But, but I think the thing that got me quite a lot about that type of imagery, which of course my mother would put in her home, or other people that I knew from Black households, or even people of color who came from places that were colonized by the likes of the British. I came across these images time and time again, and of course, as you grow up, you question these things much more, and I question, well, why are all of these people white? And if they're from this particular part of the world, if we're talking about the likes of Jerusalem and so on, why are they so white? Like that just doesn't make sense to me. So I felt that there was an opportunity to kind of combine two icons, I guess, really, that have a complete relationship with racism, in terms of its kind of function, and really to create and agitate conversation with that, because they're not easy images to look at. Of course they're not, taking on the image of the supposed Christ, and to, I guess essentially kind of, in some cases, people would see that as being defaced. But really, as far as I'm concerned, you're looking at imagery that is created from the likeness of European people as to their approach to who they thought that Christ looked like. But then also, on the other hand, you have imagery that, again, Europeans kind of have as to what they think Black people look like. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of complex kind of nuances taking place within that, and I'm happy for the viewer to kind of interpret that in a range of ways. I think there's a lot there, and especially I think one's own personal journey or relationship to that will be different from person to person, but certainly those things, as I mentioned, were kind of like part of that. But I think, you also asked the question about, obviously, the cloud performance, which happened, a year prior to the creation of the Holy Cloud series. Well, I worked on a project with Tate Galleries, which they call a residency now, which I kind of find weird because it didn't feel so much like a residency. But myself and around 9 other artists, we were invited to work with Tate's collection, their collection within their archives, which is open to the public. It's something that not many people know about, but you can spend time looking through, periodicals and various keepsakes or mementos that perhaps artists have donated, for example. And and I'd spent a lot of time, you know, working with young people from schools where they'd either been excluded or they're part of mainstream schools as well. And in fact, that's how the name cloud came across. So initially, there was no name for the motif that I'd created. In my process of making work with them, I would always talk to them about what I did as an artist, and I'd show them images. And one day I showed some images to them and asked them, oh, well, you know, what do you think of these? What does that make you think of? Just really, I guess, trying to gauge, I guess, the cross-generational kind of experience of racism, because those images of the Robertson's Golly, you know, people who are in their 20s, they're likely may have not come across that kind of imagery, let alone people who are even younger than that. So, you know, people were coming, you know, the kids were coming up with all kinds of different things. And then all of a sudden, I think like one kid said a cloud, and then another one said, oh yeah, cloud, yeah, it looks like a cloud. And I found that really strange.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I thought, you know what, let's roll with this, because I think that you know, I think sometimes, you know, when you're naming an artwork, or, you know, you place a title within it, sometimes it can perhaps be a bit overly literal. But if you call, if I call what I have a cloud, like it doesn't, you know, there's no real relationship with an actual cloud itself. I mean, yeah, I could say maybe, you know, the faces of a cloud within Super Mario games or whatnot, but really it just came from a strange kind of occurrence. But I think an opportunity to really to I think allow the viewer who is seeing the work to not kind of have a certain preconception about what they're seeing, if you know what I mean, for it to continually kind of turn on them when they're experiencing the work.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's like, you know, you subvert the expectations right away. And then you also, you know, you incite us to think through the associations that we might have.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, it really becomes kind of this interesting self-reflexive, you know, experience around like what kind of preconceived notions of things and people do we have, and how are they formed, which is actually more important.
Absolutely. And you know, so this contributed in the end over time toward like the end of this residency, as it were, when we were then invited back to create a work to look at our thinkings of I guess the experiences that we had in teaching and working with the various schools groups. And I think the thing that I kind of pulled out the most from working with, you know, such an international organization or institution was I guess the relationship with art history and the kind of like the controlling of that narrative. I think especially for me, like considering the poetry and dream space within Tate Modern, which is part of their kind of like ongoing free exhibition, which usually includes works by the likes of anything from like Matisse to perhaps Picasso, Rodin, that kind of thing. And the thing that always kind of like got me about this presentation of art history, I think especially the Cubist era, was its dependence on African culture, West African culture, but the lack of relating and explaining how important that was to the likes of Matisse or Picasso and so on. You have these rooms that talk about the impact of, you know, one of the most important perhaps kind of you know, periods in art history as we know it, yet it doesn't speak about the importance of West African sculpture or the histories of that which inspired these people. So on the one hand you have that, and I had issues with that, but then also I think another thing for me that kind of bugged me was the representation or the lack thereof. I spend a lot of time speaking with people when I work on projects or when I work in shows. I just like to get to know people, and I just noticed that, you know, when it came to people who are either working class or especially people of color, Black people, most of said people were working within service areas, whether that meant invigilating or working in like the bookshops or serving cups of coffee or that kind of thing. And I really wanted to say something about that. So the idea through the cloud performance came about where I guess I thought about the idea of a reverse heist, in that I would take the energy which has been kind of built up from the likes of this poetry and dream space with the cubism or, you know, impressionist artworks and so on, and occupy that space through the performance. I would become the cloud face. And so through that, you know, I went through this process of building the actual mask, of learning to actually breathe within that mask as well, because the only hole that you have is really the space of which you kind of have for your head. So it gets really, you know, warm in there and very kind of claustrophobic quite quickly. And I proceeded to sit amongst the artwork, kind of I guess interrupting the view of these artworks for about an hour, and then proceeded to walk a procession around the galleries and back outside of the gallery itself. And really it was to you know, talk about you know, equity or the lack thereof within the arts, and what I was experiencing and continue to experience, like many other people as well. So, you know, it was you know, interestingly, when the cloud motif was created, I'd never assumed that I would, you know, do a performance, but I guess these particular occurrences really kind of brought about an idea to try and have a, you know, a larger conversation with the work.
And the video work has you sort of like in an everyday situation on a bus.
Yes.
And but also with a trumpet, you know, sort of sitting across from you, which also is, you know, without having to say anything at all. I mean, it's actually really powerful just as an image, like it really stays with you. Would you revive ever? What conditions would bring you to maybe do that performance again?
Yeah, no, great question. I think, yeah, I mean, you know, obviously, yeah, depending on the context and what's right for it. I mean, you know, further to your question, I've even thought over the years about making, you know, a series of film works as well. So it's certainly something that occupies my mind. I guess it's really just, you know, jumping on the right kind of opportunity or moment to kind of say it when I think would perhaps be most effective. But yeah, I mean, I guess what I've not wanted to do, which I think the work kind of clearly says, or even particularly, you know, there was this cloud. What I hope to not do with the work is for it to simply just become part of, you know, the entertainment, as it were, really. You know, I think that it's the work is saying something very, very poignantly that I guess I wouldn't like it to become, you know, I wouldn't like it to become a kind of a certain victim of its own success, if you know what I mean. You know, so seeing these things on mugs and so on as a kid, I wouldn't like to perhaps like replicate that. But that being said, I guess, yeah, it's for me, it's about finding the right kind of space or moment in time to actually say that thing and to utilize that. So I think in a way that kind of speaks true to the, you know, the question you raised earlier on about my approach to media. I really try to sensorially think about what is going to say the point I'm trying to make in the most, perhaps, you know, powerful way. So it's quite exciting to, you know, to build these perhaps these strands, as it were, and then pick them up, or maybe hold on to them for a while and then continue them again. But, you know, it's a long-winded way of answering and saying that, yeah,
oh, no,
you know,
no,
who knows?
It's all important, and it gets me thinking. I mean, that performance was 7 years ago, and you know, this year in the United States, they're the mascots of very popular brands of foods like Uncle Ben's rice and Aunt Jemima, you know, syrup are all being called into question, being sort of reckoned with, you know, really unprecedentedly, even though these brands have faced these questions before. Only now is there sort of an emboldenment either within the leadership or the pressure
Mm.
to dispense of these once and for all, or even to give names to these people who have been instrumentalized for the benefit of these brands. And so, you know, what your work does is make me think about that, and then think about all of these sort of capitalist mechanisms that underpin,
Yeah.
right, the instrumentalization of people of color, right, for a kind of idea,
Mm-hmm.
which is wholly fits within the matrix of systemic racism. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't. I mean, I would like to say that the cloud could never be reduced to an essentialized one-liner. I
Mm-hmm.
think in it itself, because of its you know, this kind of simple, you know, the form
Yes.
is sort of so open. It doesn't close off any meaning. It really does kind of, you enter the orb, if you,
Yeah.
so to speak. And yeah, it would be very interesting to see how that might translate now and how we might read it
Definitely.
now.
No, I agree. I really agree with you, Cheryl. I mean, you know, the interesting thing I would even say is, you know, going back, you know, that perhaps like 7 years ago, or even more, to like, you know, 2007 or 2008. I remember when I was creating some of this work, and I guess the thing with the UK in comparison to the United States is, or I'm sure maybe other parts of the other planet, is when it comes to the conversation around race, it's so uncomfortable out here that it really kind of gets swept underneath the carpet. So when I was creating these images, I was being told directly, especially by white people, that, oh, well, you know, it's not that bad out here. You know, racism doesn't really exist. Or like, oh, why are you doing that for? That's something from back in the 70s or whatnot. And there's this kind of personal kind of turmoil of like, am I going crazy here? Like,
That's
how can you not really see this happening?
yeah.
And then the really interesting thing, I think, is, you know, when that's kind of coupled with what I like to talk about as the kind of the kind of like white reckoning or understanding of racism in relation to Black Lives Matter, there's then even a further layer of like, oh wow, so like what myself or plenty of other people have been saying or fighting for through words and actions, what we've been saying might be plausible, it might just be plausible. So there's another kind of spin on that I think mentally really kind of, you know, messes with oneself. So it's, I'd certainly say with my practice in that respect that I felt like my head's been kind of bashed against the brick wall in a certain way, because you know, those images, again, like, you know, I would have conversations with people where they'd be like, oh, well, this isn't so bad, or like, you know, maybe, you know, I'm not sure this is kind of the right kind of conversation to have, or so on. So it's been great to see, the mobilization of these necessary conversations, as it were, which certainly have not gone away at all, really, you know. And yeah, it's also, of course, encouraging to hear about the continued need for that, which, yeah, I certainly wouldn't, you know, stop doing at all. But I guess it's important for me to say that, because I think that, you know, the art scene can be quite guilty or even complicit within that whole kind of function of controlling the narrative, but again, from the position of the white gaze, as it were.
Well, I wanted maybe just close off this section
Mhm.
to say that Mighty Jesus is a really compelling work to experience directly, you know, because you have appropriated in an important way these, you know, images of you know, Christian imperialism, and then obliterated, you know, the blonde, blue-eyed, you know, sort of Jesus face that, you know, those of us in the West have just been taught that this is what Jesus looks like. And you're right, it's like completely odd, you know, just bizarre. But the also this sort of golden halo. I
Mm,
mean, it's, you know, it's got this texture to it, and the thickness, you know, sort of the paint is, you know, is something that also adds to the reading of the work and the experience. And then that you place it not directly on the floor, but sort of perched on prayer candles as well.
Yes.
I mean, it really, yeah, it gives us a lot to chew on as a painting,
Mhm.
and then also, you know, to get us thinking about the history of Western painting as well, and like, and where these images, like the artists who are making those images, like where are they getting, you know, their references from? But the meme within the meme is that's actually next level for me, because I think I'm old sometimes. It's like, oh shit, this is a meme anyway.
I think for me, it's just my relationship with like video games is
Of course.
constantly references that refer to themselves again and again, and I think that's kind of, it's always been, it's for a while it's been a way that I kind of, you know, produce my work. So there are little kind of nuggets, or what we call like Easter eggs within that aspect of culture, that, you know, there are only certain people who might like perhaps like realize that at certain points in time. But
No, it's excellent. I love it. Um, I've been looking a lot at your video as well, and I find it that you have a very compelling use of the voice.
mhm,
There's a way, you know, there's a direction, there's a storytelling quality, and it actually has a sound.
mhm,
You know, sort of the voice. I mean,
mhm,
across many of the works, where you it connects and delineates, you know, sort of
mhm.
where they're within, and they're also like kind of observers of
Yeah.
the montage that you put together visually. um, and there's a kind of simultaneity of that within and withoutness.
Mhm.
And I would love to know what motivated that approach.
Oh wow. Good question. I think in the first in the first instance, if I can be honest with you, with some of the earlier works that I produced, it really, part of it was actually an economical kind of decision. Just the fact that, you know, I didn't have the means to be able to mic people up, you know, get like lapel mics and that kind of thing to, you know, write a scene
Yeah.
with multiple characters, you know, that kind of stuff. It really costs money, and you know, I did my research within like the earlier films that I'd produced, and I just knew that I just wouldn't be able to afford that. But I then kind of I then kind of went through a process of considering some of my favorite kind of like sci-fi films, like Terminator 2, for example, where, you know, there are various points within the film, particularly the beginning, the end, a certain point toward the middle or whatnot, where you hear Sarah Connor's voice, and she's talking about the future, she's talking about history, or history as we don't know it, but is going to happen. um, and David Cameron's use of what kind of basically looked like kind of like cutaways, or like B footage, just like of scenery within like the kind of like desert area, or like the asphalt as they're kind of, you know, driving and so on. And so this, it, you know, through that, and then thinking about how narratives are even structured in video games, which when you assume the role of a character, and a lot of things are kind of spoken from the first person, even if the game isn't like a first person shooter, for example, the view isn't that of, you know, you're given this kind of like narrative, or this understanding of a situation. And I guess, you know, with being somebody who, you know, also loves, you know, comics and reading comics and things like that, you know, that there's also that approach where the fourth wall is constantly being kind of broken and built back up again and broken again. Where I felt it might be possible to be able to have a voice that is perhaps on the shoulder of the person who is listening and watching the film. So what I try not to do with the writing is to, I don't know, like kind of go on a massive kind of history lesson of things that have happened. That to me, I think that becomes useless, because the internet already is a tool by which you can use for the purposes of research, right? But in terms of the lived experience, well, I mean, you can never be, I don't think you can really be taught the lived experience, but you can be given um, you can be given perhaps like food for thought, or hear a perspective that can then complement what is being seen. And I think in saying that, I would say you know, the voice is probably the most important thing in my films when I make them. Like, I feel they're at least, the voice and sound in general is at least 50% of the experience. If you're just looking at the images, I don't know, you probably fall off at a certain point. And because I just think that the voice has a lot to kind of give, you know, whether that's kind of like the reverberations of the bass, where that will travel to certain points of your body, but really to hear testimonies, to hear perspectives, they add to what you see, to what you think you're seeing even. You know, so for me, it's about, you know, kind of creating that complexity. But it's certainly, you know, been a journey that started in a kind of economical kind of decision, but it's gotten deeper as I've gone along. And of course, even, you know, some of the people whom I speak to, or who end up doing the voiceovers. Most of the people who have done voiceovers within my films are Black women, and that's on purpose. That's important because you know, I was raised mostly by Black women, but Black women's voices don't really get to be heard within you know, various aspects of culture. So you know, it's me trying to allow that space for those conversations to be heard, which are not being allowed to be. Yeah.
No, there's an incredible intimacy, you know, in how the voice is kind of addressed in the works, and that really does, for myself anyway, that's what draws me in, is that tenderness, and that attention, you know, to voice, and the writing, obviously, as well, a really important part of that. Maybe we could talk about splicing a bit. It's huge, right? In your methodology, but also like a conceptual strategy to reveal these socio-political like contradictions.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can totally imagine you like getting into, you know, your uncle's cassette tapes, and it's like, oh yeah, I can do this, and then making your own crazy montage sound mixes. So
Yeah.
how did that come to be?
Oh wow. I think of all the like, because I've got like loads of like different bits of like sound making kit and things, and you know, as well as like video shooting devices, cameras, and so on, that I've kind of saved money up to purchase over the years. And I think the machine that I constantly go back to is one called the MPC 1000, or the Music Production Center 1000, which you know, has a long kind of like history in relation to, you know, MIDI or musical information data interface and so on. So the likes of Roger Lynn created the original, I guess, kind of system from which the MPC derives, called the Lynn drum, which a company called Akai got into business with him to then later on create what would then be branded as the MPC, or the Music Production Center. These kinds of machines, along with like the Roland machines, were essentially responsible for how hip hop, or especially hip hop production, beat making, kind of came into, you know, what we know now. You know, so with all of the I guess you know, things like what is it, the Logic kind of systems, or Fruity Loops, or Ableton Live, they all go back to that kind of system. And I bought with some money that I'd saved up, I bought an MPC 1000 in 2006, so just at the time when I started at the Slade. And as much as the Slade was a place of experimentation, and, you know, we were really encouraged to kind of do that, I knew that I didn't want any of the work that I was embarking upon with sound, with learning to play bass, with learning music production and understanding the history of that. I just didn't want it to be co-opted by a white tutor. I just didn't want anyone to kind of tell me what to do with that. So I I kind of forced myself to learn how to use the system, how to sample from records first and foremost, on my own, and that was such a tough and difficult process. You know, the instruction manual for the thing is like around, like, I don't know, 500 pages or so, like long and thick, and you know, where do you begin from where do you end with this kind of thing? So my relationship with it was very rocky. And in the end, I fortunately came across a range of different internet forums, and one especially called the Weekly Beat Sessions, which is US based, where a range of, I'd say, yeah, producers, but actually people whom produce in terms of their love, in terms of their hobby in relation to music, people who were like doctors or nurses, or, you know, they did all kinds of other jobs, but within this forum, every week they would be challenged with creating a beat from a sample that was given to us and sent to us out across the planet. So, you know, I was doing this for 3 years solid before I then thought, okay, like, you know, I've kind of done the so-called degree, as it were, but I've done it on my own terms, and now I feel ready perhaps to say and do things. So that really kind of, I think, contributed heavily to how I think about, you know, the placement of sounds with other sounds, but then sounds with visuals, or some visuals with other visuals, or, you know, placing objects within a kind of, let's say, an installation-based arrangement. You know, for me, all of that, it's the same thing. It's just a different kind of, you know, context. Even, you know, the relationship of creating a film and then scoring the audio for that. You know, the weird thing for me that I think is different to a lot of filmmakers I know is usually for me that the sound actually comes first. It's not the visual that I kind of like work on, or writing the script for the visuals, or, you know, doing you know, kind of sketches or panels, should we say. It tends to be the audio. The audio drives the experience. It creates the smell of the space. It creates the hue. It creates, you know, the depth at which, you know, a character is moving through a space, and so on. So sound and music and those nuances, I think that they always have and always will be a part of how I make work. You know, it's what's further exciting for me about that is it can really, it can start in the simplest of places and end up in the most like complex of places, and before you know it, you have a work that is building a conversation.
Mm-hmm. There's so many things I want to say and discuss. I'm thinking about you know, sort of bringing us into this present moment, about expulsion.
Yes.
A video from 2019, so pre-pandemic, and pre-assassination of George Floyd, and I was thinking about how incredibly relevant it is, a work to reveal who essential workers are, the level of risk that they're exposed to, whose labor is invisible and in the service of those in dominant positions of power, because you really talk about in this work sort of the invisible labor of people of color, and also class issues, and even though it, you know, you made this work a year ago, it really does underscore these uneven dynamics of power that have been completely invisible and taken for granted, and until, you know, I hope that we realize a little bit more now, you know, who's really out there, you know, to serve. So maybe we could, you know, close off this conversation with, you know, a little bit about what's behind that work.
Yes, yeah, certainly. I mean, so yeah, the expulsion, you know, I'd say as a work is, you know, is kind of, you know, yeah, semi-autobiographical in the way that Sunday's Best is, you know, that it's kind of placing my experience and that of of people that I know or am close to, and as a result of that, I was able to kind of build a monologue around being much younger, being a child, and not simply just witnessing, but also accompanying my mother on various cleaning work shifts across London, you know, and all kinds of spaces at that, mind you. So I don't know if the show or program Big Brother made its way to Canada. It's based, you know, that reality TV show, people are inside the building and so on. So, you know, we cleaned upon the set of the original Big Brother, for example. And there's this crazy kind of, again, this whole kind of like breaking down of the fourth wall, but also a certain aspect of popular culture that even for me personally was kind of destroyed. You know, like I'm just a kid though, just, you know, like of course I watched some of these shows, or the likes of EastEnders or London's Burning and so on, and then being at that kind of reality of the grit of being one of those many people that keeps the lights turned on, essentially, you know, and working on in this kind of, you know, yeah, I'll steal the phrase from the Stranger Things show, but kind of working within this kind of upside down or even twilight space of non-existence even. Because nobody knows that we do what we do. Nobody knows that what we do is essential to the running of society in general. Right. You know, road layers, sweepers, you know, the people who clean the dustbins and so on. And then, you know, going into those nitty gritties of these offices, so many offices that we cleaned and maintained and what have you. And I think at the heart of it, for me, there was certainly this kind of this depression of like a monotony of just doing the same thing again and again and again, whether that's punching in, you know, a PIN code to make sure that the alarm doesn't go off. Because if the alarm goes off, then you have the security people coming in, and then you got to wait there longer. And then what was supposed to be an hour's job turns to 3 hours. You know, emptying the bins properly, being resourceful with the, you know, the cleaning kit that you're being given, not even just kind of like, you know, you just clean it, but oh, you're told that you have to be resourceful, all of these things. So that it just felt like a very important, an important, I guess, testimony to put together. And, you know, I spoke to my mother like for such a long time before that work was made. And my mum's great in kind of, you know, when she talks about the past, she talks about it very much in story form. She presents it like a story. As I'll probably like take a bit of how I kind of, you know, bring together the monologues through her, you know, because she's really good at kind of, I don't know, when she talks about an occurrence or something, she's good at kind of making a kind of husky voice and then another kind of voice and saying, you know, how something progresses. But she would talk so much about the moments that she happened upon that I wasn't perhaps like privy to, for example. And again, that felt important to talk about, but maybe not necessarily bring my mother and her voice into that, because I didn't really want to perhaps like invite that trauma for her. You know, she told me enough, and there was enough there to be able to think about that I'd even, you know, taken on or experienced. So, you know, the voiceover in the end was recorded by a cousin of mine, Lincoln Che, who's an actor, and he'd done some of this kind of work before as well. So already there was a nice kind of synergy or understanding, and we then even kind of spoke about the monologue, how I'd broken down particular moments that I'd experienced as a kid, and he would talk about certain things that he'd taken on, and we would just talk about how we might you know, voice out those ideas. And then to add to that, we had James and then Christian, whom added their voices and recorded versions, who I also invited as well, and they were just incredible. So it was this as far as recording voices or monologues are concerned, for me, it was the first. It was the first real time where I kind of thought a bit about the process of recording voices within the context of like hip hop, for example, where you have doubling of a voice
Right.
on a point where the rhyme hits, or every kind of like fourth point of the beat, and so on. So that was really important, and kind of to create this this soundtrack that had these really kind of like gritty, kind of like earthy tones that, again, you know, synonymous with hip hop, or a kind of like almost Portishead type industrial sound, you know. So that was such a difficult work to make, in that it was painful, but it was also, even working with one of my aunties on her cleaning shift, you know, to try and be within that space with her. The importance of even paying her for her time. Of course, she's working, but I didn't simply just want to go there. It was important to be able to pay her for her time, because, you know, I'm going to set up, and I'm going to likely take a bit longer than it would do for you. But I also then didn't want to be too much in her way as to what she was doing. So there was a lot of, there was a lot of, you know, kind of like weight and tension to carry, and to try and, you know, work with in creating a project that, yeah, I agree with you. I think particularly in the times of Corona is even more important, and is very poetic around the importance of the people that many do not see doing the jobs that most people just are not really willing to do. And that's even a historical thing, of course, as well. If we think about the likes of, you know, the Windrush, and you know, the Caribbean, and African, and even Asian presence within, you know, the likes of, whether it's the underground or the NHS, or, you know, all of these various aspects of service and so on.
Absolutely. And in Canada, I mean, the railroad would be a good example of that as well. No, it gets us thinking deeply, and sort of we get a really big sense too of the proliferation of all of the, you know, sort of forced migration for the purposes of exploiting people's, you know, bodies for labor.
Yes.
And free or low paid.
Yes.
You know, most definitely. Oh, Larry, if we could go on and on, I'm telling you, it's so much. There's so much to talk about, and I've only gotten through about, well, a good 2/3 of my questions, which just means that we have to continue the conversation. I thank you so much for your time, and you know, I hope we get to cross paths in person one day.
I very much look forward to that. I'm hoping, at least, Stephen, you know.